All righty. Welcome everyone to the May Data Viz DC Meetup group. Hey, applause. Appreciate everyone's patience as we were letting people in. They locked the doors early on us. Just want to say we have a code of conduct here at Data Viz DC. So in short, be great to each other. If not, at least be nice. If that's not happening, let one of us know and we will see about rectifying the situation. Speaking of us.
That's us.
It's us with the, how do I get that? There we go.
Oh, wait, what is?
No. There we go.
Faces here.
There we go.
For
Yep.
those online.
Cool.
So we're the co-organizers. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any ideas for meetups or just want to chat, anything like that. And
Yeah.
Jill is also a co-organizer.
Hmm.
She's traveling right now.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, you can use this thing. Can we use this thing? Oh, we were supposed to be able to use this thing. Cool. Data Viz DC is a nonprofit group dedicated to data visualization and all of the fun things there. So welcome everyone. Oh, the clicker was working.
It's okay.
Oh, it's
I'll,
fine. Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. I just want to note that we are here at the Arlington Tech Exchange at Excella. Excella has been a generous supporter of the meetup for many years, and Excella is currently hiring BI developers and data analysts. So if you're interested in a job doing that, let me know. We also have some other sponsors as a part of Data Community DC, including Snorkel, ATA, statistics.com, Neo4j, and Science Logic. So a lot of different people are involved with making data events like this happen. Oh, it's working now. Cool.
Oh, nice.
Do you want to pitch the slide?
Okay, so we'll for those of you joining online, we'll send you the links to all of these while people are presenting, but we have a Slack workspace. You'll hear about other events from the other meetup groups like Data Science DC. They're very active on there, and just chat about common interests and things like that. So please join us. And then we're also a part of Data Visualization Society, which is a bigger group. They have a lot of fun events there too, so feel free to check them out. This is our graph gallery. So if you have done any cool vizzes recently and you want to show them off, you can submit them here and we'll post them on our website.
We'll take uncool vizzes too.
Yes.
Yeah. Any viz.
Yes, we won't tell what's ugly and not. I'm just kidding. Okay, so here are some upcoming events. Do you want to?
Yeah. A couple of upcoming events on May 13th, this Saturday, right here in this same room at Excella. There's going to be the Nova Code and Coffee. So if you want some time to meet other data tech people and have some time to write some code, that should be fun. On May 16th, Data Journalism DC is back and they're talking about technical approaches and solutions for investigating nonprofits. That should be a pretty interesting event. And then on the 25th, we're going to be having an event with Power BI DC, again, here at Excella. And that's going to be on tool comparisons between Power BI, Tableau, and Looker. So a sort of battle there that should be very interesting. Data Viz Society also has an events calendar, which has some pretty interesting international events going on. What's wrong with the clicker? Okay. If you're interested in helping put on events like this or helping out with some of the things that go on in the background, please reach out to one of us. We're always interested in help and volunteers and speakers. So if you have a presentation that you want to give, if it's 5 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, come speak to us. We've also got a form for those signups, so that works too. Does anyone else have any other announcements about other upcoming events? Anyone hiring, cool conferences? If you're online, you can go ahead and put those in the chat.
I've been working on a talk on introducing transformers that'll be for data community, DC data science, probably in around September.
Cool.
Very exciting.
Let us know when it happens.
There's a conference in Columbus, Ohio in July that I can't remember the name of. it used to be women in data and now it's changed to something else so that men can put it on their thing and get it paid for by the office. It's like data community or something. But I'm road tripping out there. So if anybody wants to go, like, I'm driving, so I will, I'll take another person to like nudge me and keep me awake on the 6-hour drive. So I forgot the name of it. I will look it up in a little intermission. At some point. If anybody's interested. Goes to online people too.
And then Michael Crow from the chat is saying Crow Insight is looking for one or more part-time front-end developers with skills in React, et cetera, and then his email in the chat. I can write it on the whiteboard later. It's hard to see.
Cool. Alrighty, well, with that, I think we should turn it over to our first presenter. Let's see, and we said that Abigail was gonna go first, if you're ready. Excellent.
Get my slides.
Yeah. And yep. And let me go ahead and I think, yep, wherever you want to stand is good. Let me go ahead. And once I hit presenter mode, it should, oh, hold on. It's given the wrong screen now. And stole the mouse. Yeah. No, that's the wrong way. Where is my mouse? Oh, there we go. Okay. Cool.
Okay, what do I press to?
Back, forward, backwards. So, yep,
Okay, and I can stand here.
yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Hello, good evening. Okay. This is fun. Okay, so to sort of quickly wind here, I'm a data scientist. I've been a data scientist for 7 years. I've written like a lot of code. It's like way more code, too much code. But I never coded from scratch in that code before. And for no reasons, I had employment situations where if I had coded a dashboard, there wouldn't have been anywhere to put it. Like maybe there's a public server, but there wasn't really any place to put on. I work in Python, I was supposed to R, where maybe it's a little less like shiny, as I think one of the first things you mostly do as an R person. There isn't really a Python equivalent, but I haven't really gotten around to this. I figured it would like kind of take a while. So up until a few months ago, I hadn't. And then a couple months ago, I did my first dashboard in a tool called Dash, which is Python library. It's on my server now, you can look at it. It's not going to really win any design awards, but the key part is it works and it's there. And it only took me really a couple hours to do. And I was really with significant help from GPT. It was just like every step of the way, like it was working code. I could say I want this functionality. And it really enabled me to do this and to do a whole lot of other things that otherwise I just wouldn't have gotten around to. So this is my second dashboard. It's in a tool called Python for Shiny, which now exists and is out in the world. Oh, yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Because the mic is.
Oh, is this better? I can keep talking if you
Yeah,
need
that'd
to.
be great.
Okay, cool. So this like does more things than my first one, and you can see it has filters, it has download the CSV, you can reset the filters, you can put values in, there's URL at the bottom where you can go to the GitHub, whatever, like it does stuff. And again, like this is something that I just never really would have gotten around to building, except now I can build everything way faster with the help of GPT, and it's cool, and I'm doing stuff that otherwise I wouldn't have gotten to do. So that's mostly like why I'm here to talk to you, because like I think there's probably stuff in the world that you want to be building too, or that you're building one way now in a tool like Excel or Tableau, and I want to talk to you about like I want to proselytize to you about like why instead you should do that with code, and how you can do that much faster and with less frustration with GPT. So that's what we're gonna do. But yeah, I'm trying to get more actual data to put this out in the world, and I really want DC to give me all the data. So hopefully we'll get there. Okay, so sort of 2-minute version of this. You think of GPT as sort of like your autodidact intern. So it knows a ton of things. It's eaten like all the text in the world, but it says weird things. So you can't like entirely trust it to get things right. It will make up functions for you. They'll say do this, and like probably it'll work. Sometimes it won't. But it just knows so many things. Like it's still worth it, even though it's kind of weird. So the way I use it, and the way I'm advising you to use it, is to give it sort of small detailed assignments. To be like, here's a specific thing I want you to do, and then it writes you some code, you try the code, you test it, you see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll sort of talk about that process. And then you give it a next step and you build out like that. So pretty much like the way I was just coding in general, but just like way faster and easier now.
Gonna get you right back up so the people on
Thank you.
Zoom can see it.
And then we're gonna talk about like why you should do this. So like you're already doing Data Viz stuff, you're either coding or you're again working in a tool like Excel or Power BI or Tableau, and all of the nice people who are going to come talk to you at a later event. So I'm going to tell you not to use any of them. But we're going to talk about why instead coding might be better for you, how it's going to let you do more things, faster things, more transparently, so you'll be able to see what you're doing better, and in a way where you're not locked into vendors the same way. So we'll talk about that as well. So sort of two parts: how to use GPT and why to code. I'm hoping we'll have a lot of time for questions at the end. I'll be brief. Okay, this is me. The important part is I'm a data scientist. But since I'm sitting here, I'll say, okay, so my slides are already on my GitHub. I hate saying the word, I have a blog. That feels like, I don't know, but I do have a blog. I'm writing about AI stuff. And also, if I work for a software development company, which has a robust data science capability, including both Python and R folks, and we mostly do government work, but not exclusively. And if you want to talk about that, then send me an email. Okay, so prompting for code. So this is how I do this, and I'll give some examples in the next slide. But like I said, really like when you're coding, the way I code, the way you probably code is with functions. So a function takes inputs and it returns outputs. So you kind of know what you're putting in, you know what you're getting out. And I would think of coding GPT the same way. Sort of tell it what your input is. So like I have a CSV file, it's called this. I want to read it in. The columns are this. The results, I want it in a table, right? And it'll write you some code. You can tell it specifically, like, write me some comments also, like, tell me what you're doing every step of the way, right? Like, it's not going to get bored. It's not going to think you're dumb. Right? Who cares if it, like, it's a computer anyways, even if it did. Like, get it to be, like, as wordy as you want it to be, right? Explain to me what you're doing generally, explain to me every step of the process, and it will do that, and it will do that. So now you have your data read in, it's in Python, it's in R, and let's say I want a bar chart, right? So I want a bar chart, I want the title to be this goes on the x-axis, this goes on the y-axis. It will write you some code. The code will probably work. It might not work, but it probably will. It's pretty good. Like the ways it messes up, typically when I'm using it are typically harder things. Like it knows how to read some data and it knows how to make a bar graph. So it'll do that for you. You'll try it. If it doesn't work, you'll sort of iterate. You can copy your code. You can copy the error message. You can put it back in. It will give you something else. I was just not doing like 6 rounds of that. Like you try once, you try twice. If it's not getting it, then you're kind of, there's some other things we'll talk about, right? You can troubleshoot that. But certainly that first process of here's what I want to do, give me some code, and you try it and probably it works. General guidance. So something like, give it a programming language, like, you can say for things like Data Viz, there's typically a few different ways of doing things. So sometimes I'll be like, can you write this for me in 3 different libraries, right? And you can see what it gives you. You iterate with that, I want this in a different font. I want, whatever. I want different labels. I want hover text. You tell it and you iterate. It might break things that I already wrote for you. So one of the ways it's kind of strange, right, is you can go over it. It writes you code. You fix something with it. This doesn't work. It fixes it. And then it weirdly just reverts back to that thing that messed up earlier that you already fixed. So like it needs a lot of supervision. But even with that supervision, my coding process is so much faster, both for things that are totally new to me and for things that I even know how to do already. It's still fast with this tool. So yeah, inputs, outputs, general guidance. Okay, so I wrote it I have some things I wanted to do today. Sorry, this text is much smaller than I realized it was when I was making this. But basically I had these models that do something, and no matter what, but there's a bunch of different parameters you can sort of set your model up by. And the 2 things I'm interested in are false positives and false negatives. So what I'm trying to do is show my client the trade-off between false positives and false negatives, and how that varies. They don't really care what model specifications are. Really what we're just interested in is basically what's the best we can get. So what I kind of put a vague sense, I want like kind of a curve that shows the trade-off between false positives and false negatives. And I had these two data frames, one for false positives, one for false negatives, with the various parameters varying for the things within the model. So I kind of knew what I wanted. And I gave it some prompts where I started with, I'm trying to show trade-offs. And it gave me something initially that wasn't quite what I wanted. So I was like, actually, I didn't want it to look like this. And all the code it gave me, every step of the way, worked. Like just beautifully, like very quickly. Now I have everything that I want in the world. And it's not always like that, but even just for like small things where like I could have done this on my own, but it was faster and it worked. And so now my code is better than it was. Okay. So other info ChatGPT. So the fun thing about Python, Shiny for Python, is it didn't actually exist when GPT was trained. Right, like it's new, you know, our Shiny has been around forever, but this isn't. So if you tell GPT, I want to write a dashboard in this tool, it will tell you this tool does not exist. Right, which is fun. Like, no, as far as I'm concerned, this doesn't exist. But it'll still write you the code for it. And the way to write you the code for it is you can go to the website for Shiny for Python, and there are two really useful things. There's a whole lot of documentation. So for each function, it will give you the parameters, and then there's a bunch of code, both there and elsewhere, that is code written with those functions. So copy it, paste it, you give it to GPT. It's like, okay, I understand now. I don't quite believe you this exists, but we'll go with it. And it writes your code. So it wasn't as seamless as the dashboard where it already knew it existed, but it still definitely sped up my process. And I would say but towards the end, I was doing all the coding myself because it would revert back to not believing the library existed. Like I would give it some code and it would be like, I think I see what you're doing. Here's some dash code that does what you want. I'd be like, okay, but it's no. But I think that's an example of how even with things it hasn't been trained on, it still has, I don't want to say understanding, but it has the conceptual tools to write you stuff that works, even in languages or in tools that it doesn't actually know about. And we talk about troubleshooting a little bit. I don't recommend going back and forth with error messages and this doesn't work, can you fix it too much? But additional things you can give it are the documentation or existing code for things you're trying to do. So like if a function isn't working and doesn't know why, then you can go find the documentation. And I mean, look, you can also do it yourself. Like we'll talk about that. But it can go faster. And I think especially if you're learning something new, then you'll just build more things and be more interested in it because your coding process will be less frustrating. So documentation, existing code. Thank you.
Naturally clicking.
Okay, so why coding? Okay, so, and I say all of these things not as like something from on high, but as on like I've made every possible mistake and done every possible thing wrong and seen the consequences. When I first started coding, my husband was a software developer, and I was like, oh, I'm doing this, and he was like, oh, you should like do version control. Like, oh, you should make functions. And I was like, I don't do that stuff. Like that's not, I know, right? And it's not, I did need that stuff, like very badly. And I had to like learn the hard way, which was not good for anybody, but I got there. And so like all of these things aren't like, this isn't like me telling you like, oh my gosh, you should do these things. This is me telling you like I didn't and I saw the results. So, okay, so we'll start with reusability. So with the dashboard that I showed you before, there are 4 charts on it from a tool called Plotly. And anytime I want to make a change to that chart, I want to change the font, I want to change the color, I'm changing one line of code and it's updating it on all those charts. Okay. Reusability in a broader sense. Let's say I have a bunch of different dashboards. I work for an organization, we have a lot of dashboards. We want the styling on them to be consistent. I can have one file, it's a CSS file, and it has all the formatting in it. And we all use it, and it's on our Git repo. We all pull from it. We want to change something because the organization says we have a different color scheme. We change it in one place. Everything updates, right? As opposed to if my things live in Excel, live in Tableau, and I'm changing everything manually every time, which is laborious. It's not what your data scientists want to be doing, and it means you make mistakes, right? So reusability. Okay, version control. Okay, so everybody has done version control in the sense that you've had a file and then you've named it, you know, file 1, file 2, file final this time, right? And it never is. So you've done like rudimentary version control. And if you're using really any tool you're using, even something like Excel or Tableau, has a version control tool, right? It has some way of tracking changes. It is not as good as what you will get if you are coding purely with text and using Git, okay? So there are things that this enables you to do, which will make your experience better. So things like, I have a version that I'm making changes in over here. My colleague is working on a different section of the code, right? We can work on it, we can save it, and then easily line by line, we can look at what every line change is from, you know, from me to the original to them, and we can decide what we want, right? And it enables you to do things like, oops, I made this mistake, right? Like I commented this thing out because I was testing it, whatever. Okay, not a great way of testing, but still I commented that I was testing it, but I didn't need to do that, right? Version control lets you be much more aware of what you're doing, of changes, lets you revert, like I broke something, I can go fix it. And it lets you really, like, everything is in your code. So all the things you did, right? Like they're there in a place. And I would say this helps as far as like, I think a lot of things live in graphical user interfaces that are just wrong forever and nobody ever finds it. This is like my nightmare, like as somebody with a bunch of Tableau dashboards, like you might think it's good, but it might really not be. It's just nobody's ever been able to figure out how, right? Whereas code, and not that there's a lot of like bad code out there, but there's at least a higher chance that somebody is going to be able to go through it and figure out what's going on there. And that's also where transparency and documentation come in. So I can write a README file that describes everything I did in this code. Actually, one of the things we'll talk about, GPT writes great README files. You paste in your code, it writes your README file. I have more README files now than I did before in the world because GPT writes them for me. Right? And like function level documentation also. So like it can write you function level documentation, right? Which again means when you come back to your code later, you're more likely to understand what you did, to remember it. You're more likely to be able to build on it. Somebody else in your organization is more likely to be able to read what you did, catch your mistakes, right? And build on it if they want to do something with it in the future. Okay, so separating out your code and your data. I'd say I work for an agency. I want to be transparent about what analysis I did, but I can't actually give everybody my data, right? I mean, my code in a way that if I'm doing something in Excel, that just isn't really a way of doing that the same way, right? Of separating those things out. Ownership and reduced vendor lock-in. Okay, so I built a dashboard. It lives on a server that I'm paying money for, not very much, but it's Python Anywhere server. I can move it anytime I want. Right? Like the code is in a place, it's on my GitHub already. The code is separate from the vendor, right? So the work that I did is separate from the person I'm paying money to host it, okay? When you're using a tool like Tableau or Power BI or Alteryx, part of their business model is making it really hard for you to leave, right? Like you picked them, you're stuck with them, you want to leave, you now have a pricey and long and annoying migration process, okay? I tried to look at these XML files from Alteryx to try to figure out, like, is there an easy way of translating this into Python? There's not, and I assume that is like intentional, right? Like once you're in, you're in. You still, if you have a large organization, you're still probably going to be paying somebody to host your stuff, but if you want to leave, it's a lot easier to leave. Okay, so as an organizational decision, something to think about. Customizability. So if you're working with a tool, they make certain things available to you, and that's kind of what there is. There's a lot more customizability in general if you're talking about using Python or libraries. And if you're expanding this into other programming languages, there's a lot of other stuff you can just build yourself. So there's just a lot more you can do. So that is why I would say you should transition to code. Okay. And if all this sounds really difficult, if you're like, okay, but like documentation, Git, I don't know what any of those things are, really good news, because GPT will also do all those things for you as well. So even things like I've been using Git for a while, but there's this error message that I was getting because I was doing something you shouldn't really do, but fine, I was gonna do it anyway. And like, yes, I could have Googled it, I did, but it was kind of a pain. And I was really just like, GPT, like just solve this for me, like make this error message go away. And it did, like it wrote me the thing and it worked. And I got to move on with my life in, 3 minutes as opposed to 20. And really that like 3 minutes as opposed to 20, like that's huge. Like you can do so many more things. You can build so many more things and you're more likely to do it also, right? So, yeah, functional documentation, README files, getting started on GitHub, getting an error message. Can you make my code more modular? Like all things you want to do. And it's not like a great programmer. Like I've gone back and forth with it and I don't do this anymore. It's like, can you fix this? Can you fix this? And it just kept writing me like more and more elaborate things. I was like, I finally like stopped. I was like, I say I know how to do this. Like I know how to rewrite this. I rewrote it and it was better and it worked. But like if you're really just starting, and just like for basic things, it really will just do it for you, which is great. Okay, so what if you like this? If you're like, I'm building things, like I still want to make a pitch for like, you can code with GPT, you should code with GPT, you'll probably get more from it and enjoy it if you also like learn some coding stuff. So like, and I would say like at some point it may be the case that GPT is so good, maybe you don't bother, but it's not there at this point. Like you will have a better experience if you do spend some time and familiarize yourself with some basics, things like, it's what is this data structure that it is giving me, right? What is, okay, we're talking about functions, why is that important, whatever. So I think if you start doing this, build some things, you like it, there are a lot of resources that can teach you how to code, like pretty much any amount of money you want to pay or don't want to pay, any amount of structure you want or don't want from like a book, right? So like a class, like it all exists. So I would say like probably go do that if you like this. Okay, so John already gave a pitch for the Data Science DC talk on transformers. Okay, so I'm talking GPT, like 4 is a lot better than 3.5. Like you can sign up for an account and pay $20 a month and it's worth it. Bard isn't really there yet. I haven't really used Copilot. You can download and run locally. Llama, which is the Facebook leaked one, which is what everybody's iterating with now. So people are training models with this. They're doing their own stuff. It's very cool. You can run it on your computer. It's not, I do some like ad hoc kind of like benchmarking stuff, which is the kind of things that I tend to do with GPT. Like, can you write me some code that does this or certain other kinds of tasks? And the one I'm running for Llama isn't really there yet, but it's cool and you can run it locally. So that's neat. Okay, and this is not displaying the way I thought it would. So we're just gonna have to do questions the old fashioned way.
So for Lambda, I've downloaded I think there's like a 7 gigabyte one and 30 gigabyte one. They're both slow.
Yeah.
Are they slow for you too?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I got like, so my computer is not super fast. But yeah, part of the reason why I'm not running a really like I think I'm running like the 7.1 is because even that is pretty slow, but it doesn't do the things I need to do anyway. So even if it were really fast. But it's cool to see like how that they're getting there and that they're improving, even with like smaller amounts of training than I guess people initially thought that it would take. Also, is there questions online? How do we?
I'm keeping track of that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I guess what elements of the tedious grunt work tasks do you think this is not capable of doing or will never be capable of doing for data science? Because I know, there's, it sounds like the sky is potentially the limit here. But at the same time, I can't help but wonder, like, are the things that it won't be able to do realistically speaking?
I mean, it doesn't write me 100% working code. Like it's the grunt work so far, like the stuff it's doing already really, really well. It's the coding that it does faster and better than without it, but especially for things that are kind of complicated. It's still, and it's like, it can take you from like coding really badly to coding like pretty well. Giving it something that's already written pretty well and saying like, can you restructure this for me? it really wasn't there. So I think it's the grunt work that it's really already there on. It's the other stuff where there's definitely room for improvements.
Do you think it can like generate data dictionaries, code books from scratch too, just like with readmes?
You know, I haven't asked it to. It's so what it did do that's sort of similar to that is I had data across different years where there was like a school name that had changed. In some cases, it had changed somewhat year to year, and I wanted it to write me like a crosswalk. And it did it, like it needed a little help with like, if it's this name and this name, then this type of thing is actually the same school. In this case, it's not. But it was able, and it was able also with like the columns were different year to year, and it figured out which columns connected to which columns in different years. So that's kind of that's the closest thing I've used it for as like a data dictionary. And yeah, like it worked well. It was good.
So we have a question from the chat from Thomas Moran. Curious if you've tested or seen the following: provided two files, aka diff and git, and asked GPT if it can identify what may have been introduced that could cause either an error or a specific change in the output.
I haven't done this really, but I have definitely done like, I mean, a lot of just coding with it is you have code that writes you ask for additional functionality, it gives you something breaks, and you go back to it with, so no, I mean, it sort of knows what change was made already, and you're trying to figure out what it did. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely do that kind of stuff, and it's like sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. Like it will always be like, oh, I'm sorry, I made this mistake X, and it will give you an explanation. It's just like it's not always correct. But yeah, that's definitely the kind of thing that I do with it.
Yeah, I'm fairly new to this ChatGPT thing. So wondering if it's real way to like import, like say a CSV file or a picture and have this edit or make changes, produce outputs.
Yeah, so there's plugins now that do that. I'm on the wait list, which is really annoying. But yeah, so Ethan Mollick is somebody who's writing about this. And he's doing that sort of stuff.
The Professor Penn.
Yeah, he's Professor Penn. Yeah, so he's doing all that cool stuff that I can't do yet.
Tried much with math, you know, like common problems that you have, things like since it's like, oh, okay, can you change this from one, you know, like grading system to another grading system?
I've had it write me code for doing some involved mathematics, and it writes me the code to do it. Like for like solving equations, like so it's like there's a SymPy library, like you want me the code for it, but I wouldn't really like. I would always want the code, you know. I wouldn't want it to give me an answer. I don't know, because I don't trust it.
So Thomas said, thank you and great tips in your talk.
Thank you.
And then Miran Asfaha said, how helpful can ChatGPT be for data quality checks?
That's interesting. So that's sort of like when I had it, like when I was giving it different strings and it was kind of start figuring out what connected to it, that sort of data quality thing. And I know like Ethan has written about using it for data quality stuff because he's actually able to upload his data. So like I think for like the data quality stuff, you really need a plugin where it's actually looking at your data. And for me, it's not yet. So I wouldn't, I've asked it to write me code to do data quality checks. And it's written me code to do that. That's been useful, but because I'm not actually able to upload it yet, it can't actually like look at it.
You looked at LangChain though? Or have you thought all about sort of the token limit problem?
Yeah. So different models have different numbers of tokens, different numbers of the text you can give it. I haven't run into that yet. For summarizing text, I'm just doing like with the API, I'm doing what I assume everybody else is doing, which is just chunking it. So, you know, breaking it up into amounts that it can handle in order to summarize. I'm sure there are like other answers where, so like if you wanna use the API sort of like ChatGPT, like to give it context for previous things you've said, then you have to figure out how to kind of compress information and give it to it as the context. So I know people are probably doing that, but yeah, for me, like most of my interactions with it are with the already just kind of a conversational way with the chat. So I'm not really running into token limits.
Let's just a comment. So, I work for Google and we just announced Cody, so don't give up on this too much.
Sure.
Cody is supposed to help you with.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's good.
So this is different from just trying.
Yeah, BARD is more like consumer, and if we're trying to differentiate it between consumer and like business. And with the business side, it would be Vertex AI and Cody. If you're just consumer, go with BARD. So.
No, if it's helpful.
Not a question, but when someone asks a question, could you just repeat it so that people?
Sorry. Yes.
No, it's
okay.
okay.
Speaking of questions, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. We can jump right to the next great presentation. Cool.
All right, let's see if we can swap the slides correctly this time. And I'm going to share the, oops, share the whole screen. So just the whole desktop.
Yeah, because we want
Yeah,
to
just swap over. Yep. Let's see, will this work? Perfect. Cool. And you can just,
this to the bottom.
yes, we can. Or thought there was a way to minimize it. How's that?
That's good. Do
Cool.
we want to mute or?
No, good.
Okay. Are we sharing the?
Not sharing.
You know.
Okay, hold on. Let's stop sharing that. I'm gonna exit out of those. And there we go. Now it should be all of them.
Okay.
Yep, perfect.
And then.
Try again. There we go.
Okay.
You can go full screen if you want.
Okay, yeah, and then I can escape. Okay. Sounds good. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hi, great to meet you. My name is Juan Vega. I work at the Latin American Youth Center as Director of Learning and Evaluation. And I'm really excited to be here and to share with you about a data project that I worked on as a volunteer with some other great volunteers and data kind to support a local nonprofit organization in making strategic decisions about where to expand services in the region using data from the American Community Survey and other resources, also employing data visualization. So the talk is titled Building Data Maturity for Community Empowerment. And I want to start by providing a little bit more context about the organization that we partner with, starting with today. Its mission is to create, sustain and, excuse me, sustain and enhance professional, mental, and financial wellness by providing customized training and resources to underserved adults. And a lot of the work they do is very interesting. They have a barbershop where they provide counseling, they provide trainings on financial well-being, financial literacy in the context of getting a haircut. So it is really interesting work, and they're looking for more information on where can they expand their services, what geographic regions of the area can they expand. So we partnered with, starting with today, to develop a data visualization to identify census tract areas with low availability of community resources. And we'll explain more of what that means. And also high community needs as potential areas for where they could expand their services to promote more mental health among their target population, especially in areas where there aren't many of the services that they provide. So we created an interactive dashboard using Dash and Plotly in Python to identify what regions of Washington, DC and Prince George's County have a low presence of community-based organizations providing mental health, financial literacy, and other types of services. We use the Idealist website to identify for every nonprofit organization in the region their geographic information, such as their address. And then based on that address, we use the Google Maps API to extract the latitude and longitude for each organization, which allowed us to, using Plotly, to locate them on a map of the region. And using information, for example, on their service area, we were able to create a map that shows us the location of each nonprofit in the city. And that is a proxy for the amount of services available in the region, specifically in important areas for starting with today, such as mental health, economic development, and children and youth. As we will see later, it is very interesting that in this region, east of the river, is an area where there aren't many nonprofits that are providing the services needed by the target population. So we will see how that ties into the community need in a moment, but this is already helping, starting with today, to make the case that in the regions where they want to serve more clients, there aren't many service providers available at the moment. It is definitely possible that organizations located in these regions are providing services east of the river, but the fact that there aren't many nonprofits based east of the river tells us that there is a lower presence of community resources. So that was very interesting. And as part of the project, we also, using Plotly, produced a visualization to show the by service type, by service category, for example, education, children and youth, poverty, and mental health, and more, the number of nonprofits in wards 7 and 8, which are east of the river, of the Anacostia River, and in all the other wards of Washington, DC. So it is very interesting to see that in all other wards, the number of nonprofits is much higher compared to the number of nonprofits east of the river, which is represented by the red bar. So again, this is highlighting that there are many fewer resources available in that region of the city. So going back to our presentation, we later wanted to understand, how do we highlight the community needs? So we have an idea of the community resources using the data that we were able to web scrape. I should have mentioned that we web scrape using Selenium and Beautiful Soup Python libraries. And that we moved from an unstructured format to a structured format in a pandas data frame to later move that data into Dash and Plotly. But later, using data from the community resilience estimates of the American Community Survey, we access data on, for example, the poverty rate by census tract, the percentage of the population that has health insurance, from the CDC, the percentage of the population that has depression, a Gini income inequality index, and more information on educational attainment, such as high school graduation, vehicle access, internet access, and walkability scores from the US Environmental Protection Agency. So we obtained data on these 8 factors. And we standardized the data using z-scores and weighted them to create a composite score ranging from 0 to 100 to flag the areas of the city that have a higher community need. So for example, those are the areas with higher poverty rates, higher areas with higher depression rates, which are again indicators that are of interest starting with today, and that highlight a greater community need. So it is very interesting that, as you can see in this region of the map, east of the river, again, is where we see a higher community need as represented by a darker shade of this orangish color. So again, east of a river is where we see a higher community need, and again, a lower presence of community-based organizations offering the services needed by the target population. You can see that here is the map of DC, but also around it is the map of Prince George's County, which starting with today is also interested in expanding services in. These purplish dots represent the specific locations where we're starting with today is providing services, already the specific barbershops. And it is confirmation that they are providing services where they're most needed, but that still there are specific pockets of the city where more services are needed. We created a way for the user to adjust the weight associated with each of these factors, such that if poverty is a factor that they want to pay more attention to, the user could modify the weights and adjust the map here. One aspect that I really liked about Dash is that it allows you to hover. So if the user desires to hover on each one of these census tracts, the user can see specific information about that census tract, and also highlights the needs score, as we called it, again ranging from a 0 to 100, which demonstrates where 100 represents the highest level of need. We also created a separate but related chart that allows the user to display data on specific factors that are of interest. For example, in this case, the user was interested in identifying the percentage of African-American households by census tract. So again, it's an interesting factor again that in these regions, there's a higher presence of individuals with that are African-American, and also where there are less community service organizations providing services there, and a higher community need as already defined by starting with today. So the benefits of this project in the end of visualizing this information is that starting with today, leadership is able to identify areas where they can expand their services as part of their strategic planning efforts that already, for example, are using this information to fundraise, for example, and say, we want to expand these services in these specific regions because that's where there are less resources and where there is the highest level of need. And this was the first time that starting with today used data in this way to make these data-driven decisions. So we see it as a successful case study of using data to make decisions. And as part of this project, we also help starting with today to identify additional efforts and resources needed to develop outcome and output indicators to monitor the success of their work. And that is part of the ongoing efforts to continue building their data maturity. I really enjoyed working on this project with DataKind and starting with today, and really recommend to everyone who has an interest in using data to support nonprofits or nonprofit organizations to definitely get in contact with William and with Richard to learn more about other projects where you can put your expertise to work to support other nonprofit organizations in district. Also, really going back to what Abigail was sharing with us, creating the code for this and storing it in GitHub definitely has allowed us to not be dependent on a tool like Tableau or Power BI. All the code that we created was hosted in Heroku, which is what is powering this dashboard in the back end. But we are happy to make this flexible and low cost for starting with today. So again, this is a case study of how data visualization can be used to support strategic decision making and community empowerment for a local nonprofit. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic project. This is fascinating.
Thank you.
So you show that the region east of the river has the highest needs, but also the lowest amount of resources, also the most amount of greatest percentages of like African American population, and so these are like very strong like correlation association. So just wondering from your perspective, are there any like causal relationship? Where does what's the direction of the causal relationship? And what are the barriers that makes it difficult to persuade more nonprofits to be located at the east of the river?
That is a great question. We definitely cannot assume causation by the data that we're seeing. It's very descriptive in nature. But I think that it can highlight perhaps some historic inequities that we know exist. And so it is useful information to, again, argue that there is a higher need for resources around mental health and financial well-being in this specific area of the city.
Maybe following from that, does your dashboard offer a data output? So if I say I want my weightings to be X, Y, and Z, and I want to cover these regions, but not these regions, can it export, let's say, like the need rating for each region? So then I could run that data in like a correlation analysis.
It allows you to change the weights. In fact, I did change the weights here, just as an example, where I changed them drastically. But for example, in this case, the poverty rate is weighted at 20%, the walkability score weighted at 60%, internet access 5%, vehicle access 5%. And so you can see that then what is highlighted as of a greater need definitely changes. So this is one way that you can change the inputs and it will give you a different need score. But it does not allow you at the moment to export data.
And it's also taking a question of what did the organization need at the time. So we're pretty customer focused. And so you know, what you said is a nice feature to have, but it wasn't top of their priority list.
One, love it, great. But my question is, obviously, you know, social services of all of these kinds work best when they exist within the neighborhood that they serve, right? You don't want someone from over there coming over to tell you
Yes.
how to have financial literacy or something. It doesn't feel right. But I do know that a lot of not-for-profits tend to have their headquarters next to other not-for-profits. So that they can go have meetings and share resources, and then they go do work in other catchment areas. So I was wondering, like, I don't know, maybe using ChatGPT, could you like use the web scraper to scrape the web pages for each of these organizations and see if they mention we worked over here in Anacostia, and maybe see if their headquarters is, you know, up on 14th because they're trying to do the lobbying to get more money, but they're really acting over there. And so it might lead a different picture. Obviously, then it doesn't work on the need side of, you know, walkability and all that, but it might be an interesting way to look at, are they really there? Or are they just there for political reasons that work with it?
That's a very good point. And I would say that that should be an enhancement that we look into as the next step, because it could be interesting just to see if, for example, there are many organizations that we see are located sort of downtown here. Yeah. Is it possible that based on their website that they are reaching the residents in this area of the city? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit about more about the geographic data within your data set? Specifically about, you know, the kind of different libraries that you're using to process it, you know, where you're using GeoPandas and Shapely, for instance, and based on that, I guess, how could you potentially adapt this to different levels of geography?
Yes, just a quick second, please. I want to present an example here. Okay, here. So idealist.org is a website that has lots of information on nonprofits in the city. And so this is the data that we web scraped. At the bottom, you can see, you can see the organization's name, their location, the issue areas that they work on, which is essentially what was used here for this dropdown value. And you can also see at the bottom the address. So this address is what we use to obtain the latitude and the longitude from the Google Maps API. And then using that data, we use Plotly to.
So Plotly can like natively understand.
Yes.
Extracted coordinate data from Google.
Yes.
Without any, okay.
Yep.
Is there any metric that it's the organization size, like number of employees and things like that?
There may be. Actually, no, I don't think I've seen that on these profiles, but it has the website to the organization. So clicking there can redirect you to that information. And that is one of the next steps that I would like to work on in the future, which would be to allow the user to be directed to the website upon hovering. So that once the user hovers, then they can be redirected to the organization's website and then find that information.
Question. Was construction, new construction, one of the dimensions of the plot? I happen to frequent those two districts in Anacostia, and there's like a change that's happening there. So I found this data kind of interesting.
Okay.
What I'm actually seeing happen.
Okay.
I mean, I'd say it's rocks. It's more like there's something. There's a what do you call it? Invasion that's happening. There's a positive change that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting.
What do you call that? Then you have more affluent folks coming into
Gentrification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you could also scrape building permits, maybe you have another project that you were trying to do with Durham, where we were working with the city, and then you could start looking at building permits and then see at least, is there new construction in an area, depending on what kind, depending on what information the city actually has.
And the dimension of poverty, like, sorry, kind of poverty in absolute numbers. So you may have more affluent people there, but in absolute numbers, you just have more folks there. So when you compare the number of poor folks living in absolute numbers, it doesn't really represent affluence that's actually incoming to the area.
Well, that means like a delta, right? So there you're looking at like saying, okay, what's the time evolution of this, right? You know, where because even if you have affluent people coming in, you would expect, like, say, for example, the census data over time, you would expect the average to change, right?
So to see a lot of that reflected in income inequality index. So you have it's the same 10% below poverty and 90% in various other bands. If there just happens to be a larger number of people overall, that inequality would be the same. So that number is reflected in there. And then you're also seeing the gentrification. Once you build, a whole high rise full of, $1 million condos, which displaced, a maybe an older building with, a little more affordable housing, you're going to see that income inequality change drastically and quickly. So you can look at the change in income inequality, but a lot of those, again, there's a little bit of a delay. We tend to see those reflected in the Gini index.
Thank you.
That's for.
Yeah, that's free. Yeah.
I mean, like, well, no, I mean, like Zillow, for example, well, we're used to have it an API, but that's gone, right?
You can scrape apartments.com. Yeah, there'd be different, like the Redfin and the Zillow would get the purchases with housing rentals, right? Whereas over on apartments.com, you're gonna get, you tend to get more of the affordable housing rather than like a Zillow situation, well, you can scrape apartment.com. They have a lot of information that we're, yeah. It's not explicit. But they don't say no, you know. I didn't say that.
Read the terms of service.
Yeah, Read carefully.
Can you not get the Zillow data anymore from what used to be Quandle, now it's NASDAQ data service? Something like that. It made it on years ago. Okay, so yeah, that's been a while.
You can still get like neighborhood statistics, but you can get individual listings.
So thank you. That's great input. So we don't have information here in this community needs score on construction, but there's definitely something to be said about economic development as part of that of construction, more investment, but also how that has a potential for gentrification. So it's a great point that could be reflected in the Gini inequality index. Thank you.
So for the policymakers or the target audience of your project, like what do you hope their takeaway is from this project, and what kind of policy change do you hope that they can push for as a reaction, reflection from your work?
Well, my hope is that starting with today, we'll be able to use this information to speak with policymakers and advocate for their services and say, we are available, we are able to provide mental health counseling in this innovative setting, specifically in a region where it is needed most and where we are culturally competent, and to allow them to continue expanding their services there, and then also to highlight the large community need that we can see based on poverty rates, the percentage of households under the federal poverty guideline, as well as the depression rates and other factors.
This was really cool. What was most surprising about the project? Like, was there anything that didn't meet your expectations in terms of the data, the hypotheses, you know, the people you were working for or helping?
Mm-hmm. I think a very interesting part of it was incorporating Prince George's County. And it is interesting to see because I have lived in both areas. I have lived in Anacostia. I have lived in the surrounding area in Prince George's County, and it is interesting to see sort of also a higher level of need in the surrounding areas, and so that it was that is helpful information for starting with today to know that they can also expand there where they are interested in expanding. I think definitely the point on where the services are actually provided by these nonprofits is something that we have kept in mind, and it is definitely a work in progress. It makes me think that we should continue looking into how we can capture that information more in a more direct way. So I think that is something that I would like to continue exploring. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Contribution here, if you study this at all, in terms of data accessibility. So the research that nonprofits tend to have less business training, less data literacy than for-profit corporate. So I wonder if that's at all talking about the making data like this accessible to people who could use it for nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
You know, since they typically not find people, that this would be more accessible to people.
Yes, and I'm really interested in pursuing that question further, because I would like to learn how, let's say a year or 2 years from now, the leadership at Starting With Today has used this information. What changes has it led to? Because I know, I agree with you. That's a very true assessment that maybe this type of tools are not often used. Although there are groups like Urban Institute that make great data tools available, but I really want to see how this has changed their operations, their fundraising, and their advocacy efforts.
What are some tools from Urban Institute? you recommend?
Somewhat, sorry.
The tools from Urban Institute?
There are many, but I think, for example, there is a prison population, and I know it's kind of a sensitive, but it's a really interesting tool that they have created, a prison population forecasting tool. And they have a way, for example, of evaluating how changing different inputs in a city can either increase or change or decrease the prison population. So that can be used for policy-making decisions. And there are many other tools that I would highly recommend if you go to urban.org. They have good tools.
Yeah,
And I'm happy to share more offline.
Yeah.
Urban also has a very rich data catalog for a number of different things. So,
They also make R packages that are quite useful.
yes.
Yes.
Maran had a question from the chat. Were there any ways that the visualizations or data in this dashboard had to be reconfigured to better serve the nonprofit needs and the layering of data, etc.?
I'm glad to say that we worked closely with starting with today. So we had check-ins to make sure that the tool was meeting their needs. But I wouldn't say, I think the one piece that they were very interested in was making sure that the Prince George's County data could be added to this visualization. First, we started only focused on DC, but they made it a priority to make sure that we had the Prince George's data there. And they really liked the ability to hover and to see every individual factor, as well as the composite needs score.
What kinds of decisions is that hovering that be used for? Like what kind of decisions are they using it for?
Well, so in this case, for example, if we look at this census tract, we can see that, or we can take even another case. So the need score here for this particular census tract is much higher compared to this other census tract. And we can see why. For example, here, the percentage of the population below the poverty line is 55% compared to this other census tract where it is 7%. The depression rate in this census tract is 21% compared to this census tract where it is 12%. So this can be useful for starting with today to say, this is a specific neighborhood that we want to survey to understand more of the community, because it is a good candidate for us to go there and open more barber shops, because that's where there is a higher level of need.
And one of the things that we do, we're not perfect at it by any means, is that occasionally either we go back to ask an organization how they're doing, or sometimes an organization will get in touch again. So an example of that is like the American Red Cross, where there's one project that we had where like every year Americans die unnecessarily, right, in fires, right, because they don't have a smoke alarm. And so the Red Cross actually, donates out smoke alarms, or like if they will give them, and they don't have infinite budget. And so we came up with a model based on sort of vulnerability and need and such before, and they're like, okay, they are operationalizing it, but then they had additional data, since we first built the model. And so they're like, okay, this is what we can do data, I can use it to redirect. And so then when they reach out again, then we can sort of see, oh, okay, yeah, these are things that we fine-tuned, and that this worked out reasonably well, and that we updated the modeling. And then they hired the guy who was their key volunteer. So, success.
All right.
Oh, there's a question for data kind. I noticed there are 4 data kind chapters. The one, does the DC chapter focus on DC, or does it / will it expand its analyses to other geographic regions? Also, do you coordinate across the chapter in terms of tool development, type of data analysis, etc., which might reduce development time at insights, etc.? And maybe you can come up and say so that my clear.
So I'll just run up and Rich may want to also comment. My name's William Ratcliffe. I'm one of the chapter leaders for DataKind DC. And so in answer to the first question, which was related to whether or not we are, like just local. The answer to that is that we were very local pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, we've broadened significantly. So for example, recently we had a project related to Chicago. And we have several that are based in, like, say, developing countries. We have some with Save the Children. And so our scope of project has actually broadened with the pandemic. We also broadened sort of our volunteer pool as well. And in terms of cross fertilization, right, then that we try to do as much as we can based on the knowledge that's developed across the network, either locally. So say, for example, that if we had somebody who's worked with, like, say, a weather API, then they can talk about that with somebody else if they need to use it. Or, say Rich, for example, has done a lot with census data. And so, he can be a resource if other people are working with census. So we have that. But now you notice that we have multiple chapters. So we have a DC chapter in the US and a San Francisco chapter, but we also have chapters in Bangalore, Singapore, and in the United Kingdom. And so when we were working with the city of DC on homelessness, I was able to consult with our San Francisco chapter, where they had done some work on homelessness and participate in one of their hackathons where they were trying to go from generalizing point-in-time surveys of the homeless to annual surveys. But then I could also talk with the United Kingdom with some of their experiences and warnings about, like some of their experiences working with data on the homeless and that sort of thing. And so we, like if there's something where there is overlap, then we try to take advantage of that. And we also reach out to other groups. And we've been very lucky, right, with some of the leadership of Data Viz DC coming to our last hackathon. And, that was incredible. And, like as we have new projects, we'd love to continue to have this sort of cross-fertilization between our communities. We are very happy to reach out to organizations where we've had cases where, for example, we had the Audubon Society where we were doing some analyses for them, and one of our volunteers started looking for GIS groups in DC to gain more expertise. So yeah.
And on the, are we local to DC or everywhere? You touched on it a bit, but there are only 2 chapters in the US, San Francisco and DC. And so projects that come up anywhere else, based anywhere else, like one of our chapters will usually take them. So we've had projects based in Durham and a lot of the international ones, like you said. During the pandemic, we got very sort of location agnostic, but now that we're starting to try and do in-person events again, we're hoping to kind of get a little bit more local again and kind of rebuild the community that we had before the pandemic. And similar to the way y'all are doing it here with Data Viz DC, that local community was like a really big part of what made our chapter go and kind of be successful. And so we're hoping to bring that back a little bit. And I think doing projects that are in the community that you're in is a key part of that also. And so we're trying to kind of relocalize a little bit post pandemic.
But still keeping in account the need. And occasionally we've tried cross chapter projects as well. I mean, that is more challenging, but like we've worked with projects with the San Francisco chapter, and like we've had some successes with that. But there are also obviously difficulties when you're sort of doing remote collaboration, which most of us are probably familiar with given the pandemic. All right, hopefully that answers that. And yeah, please join us on our Slack.
Here it says, this is also great. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think it is just a few minutes until 8 o'clock, and we do need to be out of here at 8, but the fun doesn't have to stop. If anyone is interested in having a drink, Courthouse Social is right across the street, and they have a patio, so it's a great place to hang out further, talk more shop. But again, thank you all for coming. We had some awesome presentations, so let's have one more round of applause for Abigail and Juan. And with that, have a good night. Everyone on the Zoom call, thank you very much for joining us virtually. Thank you all.